In the frozen twilight of a February morning in 1943, a solitary aircraft lifted from a British airfield shrouded in mist, carrying within its cramped fuselage a Canadian pilot who had been given orders that amounted to a death sentence. The mission assigned to Flight Lieutenant James Andrew McKenzie was not merely dangerous in the conventional sense of wartime aviation, it was calculated to be fatal, a deliberate sacrifice upon the altar of military necessity. High Command understood with brutal clarity that the intelligence photographs required from deep within occupied Norwegian territory could not be obtained, and the pilot returned alive. The mathematics of fuel consumption, distance, weather conditions, and enemy fighter response left no margin for survival. Yet McKenzie lifted his aircraft into those grey European skies, knowing that his nation required what only he could provide, accepting the unspoken covenant between the warrior and his homeland that some knowledge is worth the price of a single life. The mission became legend not because McKenzie departed on this impossible assignment, but because he returned. When his Mosquito reconnaissance aircraft appeared in British airspace, 7 hours and 43 minutes after departure, ground crews stood paralyzed in disbelief. The fuel tanks registered empty, the engines coughing on vapor alone. The wooden fuselage bore the scars of cannon fire and flak fragmentation across both wings and the vertical stabilizer. McKenzie himself, upon extraction from the cockpit, collapsed immediately, his body temperature dangerously low, his hands frozen to the control column, his mind still locked in the mathematical precision required to navigate 1,200 miles of hostile airspace, without radio communication, without fighter escort, without any margin for navigational error. The photographs he carried revealed German shipping movements that would alter Allied naval strategy throughout the North Atlantic campaign, intelligence that could not have been obtained through any other means. Yet the true miracle witnessed that morning was not the value of the intelligence, but the fact that a man given every reason to perish had instead chosen, through skill and determination that transcended rational calculation, to survive. The strategic landscape of 1940 to 1942 presented Allied commanders with an increasingly desperate paradox: the absolute necessity of photographic reconnaissance over enemy-held territory, combined with the near impossibility of obtaining such intelligence without catastrophic aircraft losses. Traditional reconnaissance methods had proven devastatingly inadequate. Heavy bombers modified for photography lacked the speed to evade enemy fighters and presented enormous targets for anti-aircraft artillery. Single-engine fighters possessed neither the range nor the altitude capability to penetrate deep into occupied Europe and return safely. Twin-engine medium bombers, while possessing adequate range, proved too slow and too vulnerable, bleeding crews into captivity or death at rates that made sustained reconnaissance operations mathematically unsustainable. The early years of the European Air War demonstrated this cruel calculus with numbing repetition. British Blenheim light bombers, pressed into reconnaissance service over northern France and the Low Countries, suffered loss rates approaching 40% per mission. The aircrew survival expectancy for deep reconnaissance operations measured in single-digit mission counts. Pilots reported the psychological horror of flying slowly over enemy territory in broad daylight, watching tracer fire arc toward their aircraft, hearing the metallic impact of shell fragments tearing through aluminum skin, knowing that evasive maneuvers were impossible without abandoning the steady flight path required for useful photography. The intelligence gathered proved invaluable, revealing German shipping concentrations, railway movements, troop deployments, and fortification construction. Yet the price extracted from reconnaissance squadrons generated a grim arithmetic. Each intelligence breakthrough purchased with multiple aircraft and crews meant that the pool of experienced reconnaissance pilots diminished faster than training programs could replenish them. Tactical failures compounded these losses. Early reconnaissance aircraft lacked adequate defensive armament, relying upon speed and altitude that proved insufficient against modern fighter aircraft. Radio communication systems failed at extended range or suffered jamming from German electronic warfare units, leaving reconnaissance crews isolated without early warning of interceptor approach. Navigation systems based upon dead reckoning and visual landmarks proved unreliable over cloud-covered terrain or when weather fronts disrupted planned flight paths. Oxygen systems failed at high altitude, camera equipment froze in sub-zero stratospheric temperatures, and engine performance degraded in the thin air above 20,000 feet. Each technical limitation translated directly into lost crews and failed missions. By 1942, Allied strategic planners confronted an existential question: how could essential intelligence be gathered without exhausting the entire reconnaissance force? The answer demanded technological innovation that seemed to violate fundamental principles of aircraft design. What was required was an aircraft possessing the speed of a fighter, the range of a medium bomber, the altitude capability of a specialized reconnaissance platform, and the structural integrity to survive combat damage, characteristics that conventional engineering wisdom held to be mutually exclusive. The search for this impossible synthesis would lead British aircraft designers toward radical solutions, unconventional materials, and a revolutionary airframe concept that would transform the nature of aerial reconnaissance and create the weapon that would carry James McKenzie into legend. The aircraft that would eventually save Mackenzie's life emerged from the drawing boards of the de Havilland Aircraft Company, specifically from the uncompromising vision of Geoffrey de Havilland and his chief designer, Ronald Bishop. These men approached aircraft construction with a philosophy that placed them at odds with conventional British aviation doctrine. They believed in speed as the primary defensive characteristic, in wooden construction as superior to aluminum for certain applications, and in the principle that an unarmed aircraft designed for pure velocity could survive where heavily defended bombers failed. Their vision was not born from abstract theorizing, but from bitter observation of bomber losses over Europe, and a profound conviction that the aviation establishment had committed itself to a fundamentally flawed paradigm. De Havilland himself had witnessed the evolution of military aviation from its primitive origins through the first global conflict and into the modern era. He understood viscerally that the increasing lethality of anti-aircraft systems and fighter aircraft had rendered the concept of the defended bomber increasingly obsolete. Gun turrets added weight, created aerodynamic drag, required additional crew members, and ultimately proved inadequate against modern cannon-armed fighters attacking from high-speed passes. The traditional solution, adding more armor, more guns, more defensive equipment, created a fatal spiral of diminishing returns. Each protective addition reduced speed and maneuverability, making the aircraft more vulnerable to the very threats it sought to counter. De Havilland proposed instead a radical inversion: strip away all defensive armament, eliminate every unnecessary pound of weight, optimize the airframe for absolute speed, and create an aircraft so fast that interception became practically impossible. The British Air Ministry received this proposal with profound skepticism bordering on hostility. Committee members questioned whether wooden construction could withstand combat stresses. They doubted that unarmed aircraft could survive in defended airspace. They worried that specialized speed platforms would prove too fragile, too limited in payload capacity, too dependent upon perfect weather conditions. The conceptual debates extended through months of bureaucratic resistance, with de Havilland and Bishop repeatedly forced to defend principles that seemed to contradict everything the aviation establishment believed. The breaking point arrived when reconnaissance loss rates reached crisis levels and traditional solutions had demonstrably failed. Facing catastrophic pilot attrition, the Air Ministry reluctantly authorized construction of prototypes, granting de Havilland permission to pursue his unconventional vision. Bishop's detailed design work revealed the elegance hidden within the radical concept. The airframe would be constructed primarily from laminated wood, specifically birch plywood bonded with specialized resins developed for marine applications. This material choice provided multiple advantages. Wood offered excellent strength-to-weight ratios, could be manufactured without consuming aluminum needed for other aircraft, could be shaped into complex aerodynamic curves impossible with metal construction, and possessed natural vibration-damping characteristics that reduced structural fatigue. The fuselage would be formed from two molded plywood shells bonded together, creating a structure simultaneously light and immensely strong. Twin Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, the same power plants that drove Spitfire fighters, would provide extraordinary performance. The philosophical debates within the design team centered upon the fundamental purpose of the aircraft. Some advocated for a pure fighter configuration, others for a dedicated bomber variant, still others for specialized reconnaissance. Bishop synthesized these competing visions into a modular design capable of adaptation, a basic airframe optimized for speed and range that could be configured with bomb bays, camera installations, or additional fuel tanks depending upon mission requirements. This flexibility would prove crucial, allowing the same basic design to serve multiple combat roles while maintaining the core characteristics that made it revolutionary. The aircraft that emerged from these debates, designated the Mosquito, would become the weapon system that transformed Allied reconnaissance capabilities and created the conditions that made Mackenzie's impossible mission achievable. The prototype Mosquito that first lifted from Hatfield Aerodrome on November 25, 1940, represented both a technical triumph and a calculated gamble. Test pilot Geoffrey de Havilland Jr., son of the company founder, reported performance characteristics that exceeded even the optimistic predictions of the design team. The aircraft demonstrated speeds approaching 400 miles per hour in level flight, handled with fighter-like agility despite its twin-engine configuration, and possessed a service ceiling exceeding 30,000 feet. These performance figures placed the unarmed wooden aircraft among the fastest operational planes in the world, capable of outrunning virtually every enemy fighter then in service. Yet translating prototype promise into operational reality demanded solving cascading technical challenges that threatened to derail the entire program. Wooden construction, while theoretically sound, proved exceptionally difficult to mass-produce with the precision required for military aviation. Unlike aluminum airframes that could be riveted from standardized components, wooden Mosquitoes demanded skilled craftsmen capable of working with complex curves and ensuring perfect bonding between laminated layers. The specialized resins required for gluing plywood components suffered from temperature sensitivity, curing inconsistently in cold factory conditions, and occasionally failing catastrophically when aircraft operated in extreme climates. Early production models revealed problems with moisture infiltration that caused wood swelling and delamination, particularly in the tail assembly where structural failures threatened control authority. Engineers struggled to develop waterproofing treatments that protected wooden surfaces without adding excessive weight or degrading aerodynamic smoothness. Engine installation created additional complications. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, while providing extraordinary power, generated intense heat and vibration that wooden engine mounts initially proved unable to withstand. Cooling systems required careful redesign to prevent overheating during extended high-speed flight while avoiding excessive drag from enlarged radiator openings. Propeller selection involved complex trade-offs between takeoff performance, cruise efficiency, and high-altitude capability. Fuel system design had to accommodate the long-range requirements of reconnaissance missions, necessitating multiple internal tanks carefully positioned to maintain proper center of gravity throughout the mission as fuel burned away. Each tank required structural supports, plumbing connections, and fire suppression systems that added weight and complexity. The reconnaissance variant demanded specialized modifications that transformed the basic airframe into a precision intelligence-gathering platform. The bomb bay was converted to house vertically mounted cameras capable of capturing high-resolution imagery from altitudes above 25,000 feet. These cameras required heating systems to prevent film from freezing, vibration isolation to ensure image clarity, despite engine operation, and precise timing mechanisms synchronized with aircraft speed and altitude. Navigation equipment expanded to include drift sights, astrocompasses for polar operations, and rudimentary radar altimeters for operation in zero visibility conditions. Additional fuel tankage extended range beyond 1,500 miles, enabling penetration deep into occupied Europe or lengthy patrols over Atlantic shipping routes. Political interference nearly strangled the program before operational deployment. Senior Royal Air Force commanders, wedded to conventional bomber doctrine, viewed the Mosquito as a wasteful diversion of manufacturing resources that should be dedicated to heavy bomber production. They argued that specialized reconnaissance platforms represented an inefficient use of limited factory capacity and skilled labor. Only sustained advocacy from reconnaissance squadron commanders, who had witnessed the devastating inadequacy of existing aircraft, convinced political leadership to authorize full production. By late 1941, Mosquito reconnaissance variants began entering service with No. 1 Photographic Reconnaissance Unit, the elite squadron tasked with the most dangerous intelligence-gathering missions over occupied Europe. These aircraft, stripped of all armament and optimized purely for speed and altitude, became the tools that made missions like Mackenzie's theoretically survivable, though surviving remained a matter of extraordinary skill and fortune, rather than any guarantee inherent in the technology itself. The briefing room at Royal Air Force Lukers fell silent when the intelligence officer revealed the target coordinates. The Norwegian port of Trondheim, 1,200 miles distant through airspace defended by German fighter bases stretching across occupied Norway. Flight Lieutenant James McKenzie studied the mission parameters with growing comprehension of what High Command was actually requesting. The Kriegsmarine had concentrated capital ships in the fjords surrounding Trondheim, threatening Atlantic convoys with surface raiders that could devastate merchant shipping. Allied planners desperately needed photographic confirmation of vessel types, deployment patterns, and defensive arrangements. Yet the distance involved, combined with winter weather patterns and concentrated enemy defenses, created a mission profile that permitted no errors and offered virtually no margin for survival. Mackenzie absorbed the brutal arithmetic in silence. Maximum range for his Mosquito, carrying full internal fuel, reached approximately 1,500 miles under ideal conditions. The mission required 1,200 miles of outbound flight, time over target for photography, and 1,200 miles return, a total distance of 2,400 miles that exceeded aircraft capability by nearly 60%. The only solution involved flying at maximum efficiency cruise speed at optimal altitude, maintaining perfect navigation to avoid any wasted distance, and praying that forecast tailwinds materialized as predicted. Fuel consumption calculations allowed zero reserves. If winds proved less favorable than forecast, if weather forced any deviation from the planned route, if combat maneuvering became necessary to evade fighters, the aircraft would exhaust fuel somewhere over the North Sea, with no possibility of reaching British territory. The intelligence officer concluded the briefing with clinical detachment. "We need these photographs. We understand the fuel situation. The decision to proceed is yours." Mackenzie understood the translation. This is a suicide mission disguised as a voluntary assignment. Pre-dawn darkness still gripped the airfield when Mackenzie conducted his pre-flight inspection by torchlight, checking control surfaces, examining propeller blades for ice accumulation, verifying that camera installations had been properly heated and secured. Ground crew had fueled the Mosquito to absolute maximum capacity, filling every internal tank until fuel sloshed against filler caps. The aircraft sat heavy on its landing gear, overloaded beyond normal operational limits, requiring extended takeoff roll and careful handling during initial climb. Mackenzie settled into the left seat, worked through startup procedures, felt the Merlin engines rumble to life with their characteristic deep-throated roar. The takeoff, conducted in darkness with a dangerously heavy aircraft, demanded absolute precision. Airspeed built slowly as the Mosquito accelerated down the runway, tail lifting gradually, the aircraft reluctantly breaking free from Earth as Mackenzie rotated at the last possible moment before running out of concrete. Trees at the airfield boundary flashed past beneath the wings with terrifying proximity as the overloaded aircraft clawed for altitude. The outbound flight became an exercise in relentless concentration and mathematical precision. Mackenzie maintained exact altitude, monitored engine temperatures and fuel consumption with obsessive attention, calculated drift corrections from observed wind patterns, and continuously updated his navigation plot. Dawn arrived as a gradual brightening behind scattered clouds, revealing the steel-grey North Sea stretching endlessly below. German-occupied Norway appeared as a dark coastline materialized from morning mist, mountains rising steeply from the shoreline, snow-covered peaks gleaming in early light. Mackenzie descended to wave-top altitude, using terrain masking to avoid coastal radar detection, then climbed sharply as he approached Trondheim, needing altitude for the vertical photography run. The moment he crested the mountains surrounding the target area, German defenses erupted with coordinated fury. Anti-aircraft batteries opened fire simultaneously, filling the sky with black explosions of flak that blossomed around the Mosquito like malevolent flowers. Mackenzie held steady, knowing that evasive maneuvers would ruin the photographs and render the mission meaningless. Explosions rocked the airframe, shrapnel tearing through wooden skin with sounds like tearing fabric. Warning lights illuminated across the instrument panel. The camera system cycled automatically, capturing frame after frame of German shipping while Mackenzie flew with mechanical steadiness through the storm of steel. Then the fighters arrived, Messerschmitt 109s diving from altitude with cannon blazing, forcing Mackenzie into violent evasive maneuvers that consumed precious fuel and pushed the damaged aircraft to structural limits. The return flight transformed into a desperate race against fuel exhaustion. Mackenzie calculated remaining reserves with sinking recognition that reaching British territory was mathematically impossible. Yet surrendering to inevitability contradicted everything in his nature. He experimented with lean fuel mixture settings that risked engine damage, climbed to higher altitude seeking more favorable winds, shut down one engine temporarily to conserve fuel, restarted it before descent into denser air caused the remaining engine to overwork. Hours blurred into a dreamlike state of cold exhaustion and relentless calculation. The North Sea appeared again, grey and hostile beneath scattered clouds. Fuel gauges registered empty, showing zero remaining reserves. The engines continued running on vapor, each revolution a minor miracle. The British coast materialized through haze like a vision from delirium. Mackenzie descended toward Lucia's with both engines coughing, the propellers windmilling erratically as fuel flow finally ceased completely. The Mosquito glided the final miles, Mackenzie stretching every foot of altitude, crossing the airfield boundary at minimum controllable speed, touching down with landing gear barely extended, rolling to a stop with both engines silent and every fuel tank completely dry. The success of Mackenzie's mission, and dozens of similar operations conducted by Mosquito reconnaissance crews throughout 1943, fundamentally altered Allied intelligence gathering capabilities and prompted rapid expansion of the aircraft's operational roles. The basic airframe proved remarkably adaptable, its inherent speed and altitude performance creating a platform suitable for diverse combat applications that extended far beyond the original reconnaissance configuration. De Havilland production facilities, supplemented by Canadian and Australian manufacturing operations, eventually produced more than 7,000 Mosquitoes in numerous variants, optimized for specific combat requirements, creating a family of aircraft that served across every theater of the global conflict. The fighter-bomber variant emerged as perhaps the most versatile configuration, combining high-speed penetration capability with substantial weapons payload. These aircraft carried four 20mm cannons in the nose, along with four 7.7mm machine guns, providing devastating firepower against both aerial and ground targets. The internal bomb bay accommodated up to 4,000 pounds of ordnance, enabling precision strikes against targets that required the speed and accuracy only the Mosquito could provide. Royal Air Force squadrons employed these aircraft for daylight raids against specific high-value targets throughout occupied Europe. Gestapo headquarters in Copenhagen, obliterated with pinpoint accuracy, prison walls in Amiens breached to liberate resistance fighters, V-weapon launch facilities demolished before they could unleash rocket attacks against London. The psychological impact of these raids exceeded their material damage, demonstrating that no target in occupied territory remained safe regardless of defensive preparations. Night fighter variants revolutionized Royal Air Force defensive operations against German bombing campaigns. Equipped with air intercept radar mounted in the nose and crewed by pilot-navigator teams trained in radar interception techniques, these Mosquitoes hunted German bombers throughout the night skies over Britain and occupied Europe. The aircraft's speed advantage allowed pursuit and interception of even the fastest German bombers, while its heavy cannon armament destroyed targets with devastating efficiency. By 1944, Mosquito night fighters had reversed the balance of nocturnal air combat, inflicting unsustainable losses upon German bomber formations and eventually forcing abandonment of sustained night offensive operations against British cities. Crews developed legendary reputations, some achieving dozens of confirmed night victories through combination of technical skill, courage, and the extraordinary capabilities of their aircraft. Pacific theater operations demonstrated the Mosquito's adaptability to tropical conditions and extreme-range maritime patrol requirements. Royal Australian Air Force squadrons operated specialized variants, optimized for anti-shipping strikes and long-range reconnaissance across the vast distances of the Southwest Pacific. These aircraft, modified with additional fuel tankage and naval strike equipment, attacked Japanese shipping throughout the Netherlands East Indies, hunted submarines along remote island chains, and provided photographic reconnaissance of invasion beaches prior to amphibious operations. The wooden construction that had initially concerned Air Ministry officials proved advantageous in tropical humidity, resisting corrosion that plagued aluminum airframes while remaining structurally sound, despite challenging environmental conditions. Arctic operations revealed the Mosquito's capability to operate in the most extreme climates. Squadrons based in Scotland and Iceland flew maritime patrol missions across the Norwegian Sea, photographed German installations along the Norwegian coast, and intercepted German reconnaissance aircraft attempting to monitor Allied convoy movements. These missions, conducted in conditions of extreme cold, limited daylight and violent weather systems, demanded both extraordinary aircraft reliability and crew endurance. Pilots reported that the Mosquito's wooden construction actually proved beneficial in sub-zero temperatures, avoiding the metal fatigue and cold weather embrittlement that affected aluminum aircraft while maintaining structural integrity through repeated thermal cycling. The Pathfinder variant pioneered target marking techniques that revolutionized Royal Air Force bomber operations. These specialized Mosquitoes, equipped with advanced navigation systems and target identification equipment, preceded main bomber formations to mark targets with colored flares and incendiary markers. The speed of the Mosquito allowed Pathfinder crews to arrive over targets ahead of slower heavy bombers, assess conditions, adjust marking based on observed accuracy, and then escape before German defenses fully mobilized. This tactical innovation dramatically improved bombing accuracy, while reducing losses among the main bomber force, demonstrating how a small number of high-performance aircraft could multiply the effectiveness of much larger formations. The conclusion of the Second World War in 1945 did not end the Mosquito's operational career, but rather initiated a prolonged second life characterized by adaptation to new roles and continued service with nations that valued its unique combination of capabilities. While jet aircraft increasingly dominated frontline combat operations, the Mosquito's wooden construction, relatively simple maintenance requirements, and proven reliability ensured continued deployment for specialized missions where raw speed mattered less than endurance, range, and operational economy. The aircraft that had saved James McKenzie's life through its extreme performance now saved itself from obsolescence through its versatility and dependability. Royal Air Force reconnaissance squadrons continued operating Mosquitoes through the late 1940s, flying photographic missions over former enemy territory as Allied intelligence organizations mapped the devastation of Europe and monitored Soviet military activities along the emerging Iron Curtain. These aircraft, worn from wartime service but still airworthy, provided capabilities that early jet reconnaissance platforms could not match: the range to conduct lengthy border patrols, the altitude performance to overfly defended territory, and the reliability to complete missions over remote terrain where mechanical failure meant certain death. Pilots who had flown Mosquitoes during wartime often volunteered for these continued operations, trusting the aircraft they knew and respecting its proven ability to bring crews home despite hostile conditions. Target towing variants served training commands throughout the 1950s, providing realistic high-speed targets for anti-aircraft artillery crews and fighter pilots learning interception techniques. The Mosquito's speed ensured that gunners and pilots trained against targets approaching the performance of modern jet aircraft, while the aircraft's robustness allowed it to withstand the occasional hit from training ammunition without catastrophic failure. These unglamorous duties extended the type's service life far beyond its original design expectations, with some individual aircraft accumulating thousands of flight hours across decades of operation. Remote patrol duties absorbed many surviving Mosquitoes, particularly in nations with vast territorial expanses and limited aviation resources. The Royal Canadian Air Force operated maritime patrol Mosquitoes along Arctic coastlines through the early Cold War period, monitoring Soviet submarine activity and providing search and rescue capabilities across regions where aircraft reliability literally meant the difference between life and death. The wooden construction that skeptics had questioned during initial development proved advantageous in these harsh environments, suffering less from corrosion and cold weather degradation than contemporary metal aircraft. Canadian pilots, many of them veterans who had flown Mosquitoes in combat, expressed profound confidence in the aircraft's ability to survive engine failures, navigate through blizzards, and return safely from missions that would have destroyed lesser machines. Civilian conversions extended the type's operational life into purely commercial applications. Numerous Mosquitoes received modifications converting them into fast courier aircraft, executive transports, and aerial survey platforms. Companies valued the same characteristics that military operators had prized: speed that reduced transit times, range that eliminated intermediate stops, and reliability that ensured mission completion. Some of these civilian Mosquitoes operated into the 1960s, becoming increasingly rare reminders of wartime technology persisting in an age of turbine engines and pressurized cabins. The emotional significance that veterans attached to the Mosquito transcended rational assessment of its technical capabilities. For men like James McKenzie, who survived impossible missions because their aircraft possessed the performance to outrun death itself, the Mosquito represented more than mere machinery. It symbolized the careful craftsmanship of British and Canadian workers who had built these wooden warriors, the innovative vision of designers who trusted speed over armor, and the countless moments when the aircraft's extraordinary capabilities had transformed certain death into unlikely survival. Veterans organizations preserved several examples as memorial aircraft, maintaining them in flying condition not merely as historical artifacts, but as living tributes to the crews who had flown them and the innovative spirit that had created them. The mission that Flight Lieutenant James Andrew McKenzie completed on that February morning in 1943 transcended its immediate intelligence value, becoming instead a parable about human courage amplified by technological excellence. The photographs he captured, obtained at such terrible cost and delivered against all rational expectation, altered Allied naval strategy and saved countless merchant seamen from death in the North Atlantic. Yet the deeper significance of his survival lies in what it revealed about the relationship between warrior and weapon, between human determination and technological capability, between the mathematics of impossible odds and the refusal to accept mathematical certainty as destiny. The Mosquito itself stands as testament to the power of unconventional thinking when confronted with existential challenges. In an era when aviation doctrine emphasized defensive armament, heavy armor, and brute strength, Geoffrey de Havilland and Ronald Bishop proposed the radical alternative: strip away all excess, optimize for pure performance, trust in speed as the ultimate protection. Their wooden aircraft, dismissed by skeptics as too fragile and too specialized, proved among the most versatile and successful designs of the entire conflict. Its legacy extends beyond mere statistics of production numbers or mission counts into the realm of conceptual innovation, demonstrating that solutions to seemingly intractable problems often require abandoning established wisdom in favor of first principles thinking. For Canada, Mackenzie's impossible survival became woven into national memory, as exemplifying the character that Canadians displayed throughout the global conflict: quiet competence, extraordinary courage, determination to complete impossible tasks through skill and persistence, rather than bravado or bombast. The generation that fought the Second World War shaped Canadian identity profoundly, and stories like Mackenzie's helped define what that generation represented. His mission demonstrated that Canadians would attempt what others considered suicidal, that they possessed the technical skill to succeed where success seemed impossible, and that they would return from the impossible not through luck but through mastery of their craft. The broader legacy encompasses lessons that extend beyond military history into fundamental truths about human endurance and innovation. Mackenzie's survival required the convergence of exceptional engineering, strategic vision, operational planning, individual skill, and what observers might label luck, but what perhaps better deserves recognition as the outcome when preparation meets opportunity. His mission reminds modern observers that technological capabilities create possibilities, but that actualizing those possibilities demands human courage, that mathematical calculations of probability should inform decisions but need not determine outcomes, and that the boundary between achievable and impossible exists primarily in human perception rather than physical reality. The enemy was shocked when Mackenzie returned alive, because they had calculated, correctly, that his mission exceeded the performance envelope of any known aircraft. What they failed to calculate was that Mackenzie flew not merely a Mosquito, but the revolutionary synthesis of wood speed and human determination that the Mosquito represented, and that this synthesis, pressed to absolute limits by a pilot who refused to accept certain death, could accomplish what enemy calculations had declared impossible.